I was raised in a cult. Of course, if you'd have asked me all those years ago, or anyone else in our small fundamentalist church, if we were a cult, we'd have indignantly replied, absolutely not. Other groups like the Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, they're cults, but we're not a cult. Everything became normalized, though, but it wasn't until decades later, after I deconstructed my entire belief system and walked away from the Christian faith entirely, that I began to see just how cultish the whole thing actually was. But before all of that, for over 20 years, I'd served both as a pastor and a Bible college teacher, so I had a hand in it, furthering the toxicity also. So in the process of rebuilding my life and discovering my authentic identity, I've got lots to work through, things like religious trauma syndrome, rapture anxiety, and just so much more. Join me, Dr. Clint Haycock, on the Mind Shift podcast as we take a look at such topics as cult tactics and psychology, religious trauma syndrome and religious addiction, taking your life back after leaving a cult or high-control group, and finally, dominion theology and the dangers posed by the Christian right, not just in America, but indeed the world. You can find my show on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. Who knows, it might just be time for a mind shift.
Episode 105. What questions to ask of an agnostic atheist? This is Matthew, and in this episode I'll be going through a podcast from Stand to Reason. The show is hosted by Amy Hall and Greg Koukl. The specific episode being addressed is one where they give questions to ask someone who says they're agnostic atheist. This is a label I am happy to apply to myself, so it is only fair that I engage with the questions that they suggest. Let's see what they say. Link 1 goes to the original podcast. I'll start from the point where they read the listener question.
So, Greg, you ready for the first question?
Amy, I'm ready. Thanks.
All right. Here's a question from Robert. On TikTok Live, I keep seeing people claiming to be, quote, agnostic atheist. I believe it's an attempt to dodge any burden of proof. What tactical/Columbo questions would you ask to engage them?
And we're off to a bad start, because the question includes a dangerous assumption, that the label agnostic atheist is a dodge to avoid the burden of proof. For the record, I do not do this. That is not my motive. Maybe someone else does. If that's the case, let's hope they do get to that.
This is a very good observation, and I agree with you.
Great. Let's see an example.
I've heard Michael Shermer, founder of Skeptic Magazine, author of quite a number of books, advancing atheism aggressively against theism, especially Christian theism, saying he's not an atheist, he's an agnostic because he doesn't know God doesn't exist.
I'm not going to comment on what Michael Shermer says about himself. Instead, go to link 2 for a statement from 2012 where he talks a little about this, and conveniently mentions burden of proof at the end of the item.
He's got a PhD in sociology or something like that. Nevertheless, he ought to, I want to be charitable here and just simply say that this isn't a deceptive maneuver, but he just hasn't thought it through.
Patronizing, but okay, let's hear him out.
Believing something is so is not the same as knowing something is so. That's a completely different issue.
Well, that's hardly a revelation. I wonder what he's trying to say here.
Most theists would probably say they don't know for sure that God exists.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean they're not theists. That doesn't mean they're agnostic. An agnostic or a theist or an atheist has to do with belief and not knowledge.
Oh dear. I fear that this is going to spiral down a definition black hole. It is never helpful when this happens. Of course it's good to ask people what their position is, but it isn't good to project our own interpretation onto those people. With that in mind, whenever I use the word agnostic, I use the definition taken from the Cambridge Dictionary, see link 3. That is, I do not know that a God exists. Or I might even say, I believe it's impossible to know for sure if a God exists. In either case, I am prepared to consider evidence that might change my mind. I am aware that this directly contradicts what Greg has just said, because he asserted that agnostic is about belief and not knowledge. I do not use agnostic that way, and I suspect this difference in usage will cause problems.
So let me just say this again. It has to do with what someone believes is the case, not what someone knows is the case. Now, knowledge is justified true belief.
Yeah, sure, knowledge is a subset of belief. No problem there, but remember, my usage of agnostic applies just to that knowledge subset of belief. I suspect that what Greg is going to do here is he's going to obfuscate between belief and knowledge to apply agnosticism to the area of belief outside of knowledge. Let's see and find out, shall we?
That means if you know something, it's got to be true, or else you don't know it. It's not knowledge if it's not true. But it's not just that, and you must believe it to be so. So you must believe something that you say you know. I mean, this is no duh. But it can't be just a shot in the dark to call it knowledge. You have to believe it with good, solid justification. Okay? That's where the justified part comes in justified true belief. So all knowledge claims are a subset of beliefs, but not all beliefs are knowledge.
Okay, sure, but I don't see why we need this lecture. This is supposed to be about what questions would you ask to engage someone. Maybe we're going to get to a question. Come on, Greg.
Okay, you can believe all kinds of things that are wrong, but there are some things that you believe that are actually true and well justified, and you can call them knowledge.
Yes, we get that. So, the questions?
Now, Michael Shermer believes that God does not exist.
And here comes a projection. Come on, Greg, you're better than this.
Because what you don't do is you don't write a whole bunch of best-selling books about things you have no opinion about.
And opinions are neither beliefs nor knowledge, are they?
He believes God does not exist. So if you believe God does not exist, that makes you an atheist.
Hey, Greg, why don't you just ask him? Or maybe quote him and include a link?
If you don't know one way or the other, in other words, if you don't have enough knowledge to form a belief, I got to write this down, don't have enough knowledge, because I'm writing this something about this, knowledge to form a belief.
Hang on, I thought knowledge was a subset of belief, so to have that knowledge, it is a part of belief. You believe and then you have knowledge, but you don't have enough knowledge to form a belief. There seems to be some contradiction to what Greg was saying earlier.
Then you are agnostic.
So, having said that agnostic was a statement of belief, not of knowledge, he now says that not having enough knowledge makes you agnostic. Did he actually... Oh, I give up.
All right? Nothing tricky about this at all. Michael Shermer is not an agnostic.
Still projecting onto other people, Greg, and still not asking questions. Okay.
And these maneuvers, I think, are rhetorical devices.
What maneuvers, though, Greg? All we've had so far is you telling us your opinion on another person's belief state. You haven't quoted anybody, and you haven't given examples of things that anybody says. The original question was, what questions would you ask an agnostic atheist? All you've done is define and tell us what a certain person believes. We've had no questions, so it seems like the maneuvers and the rhetorical devices are all you, Greg, not me or us.
To evade issues like burden of proof.
But that's not the case, and telling me so doesn't make it so.
So I think a question here
At fucking last.
is maybe this, and I'm writing as I'm talking because I'm sorry, but this is just the way I do these things, and I think better on my feet
Well, that's a highly suspect claim.
than sitting in front of my computer trying to write a chapter. This is going into a chapter in a book. So are you saying you have no opinion?
So, having deftly set the scene by lecturing us on belief and knowledge, Greg switches to using opinion. What sort of holy dishonesty is this? It's almost like he's intentionally asking a leading question in order to set a trap.
About whether God exists or not. There you go. Are you saying you have no opinion about whether God exists or not?
I have lots of opinions, and my opinion on the existence of God is that I think it's highly unlikely that any God exists. It's also my opinion that this is a great question if you want poor quality dialogue and to give the impression that you are a self-righteous jerk. For better quality dialogue and the chance of prolonged engagement, I suggest you ask the agnostic atheist to explain their belief position and what it is that makes them hold that position. It's open-ended and allows them to use their own words and definitions, and provides plenty of scope for follow-up questions.
That's a question. And then they're going to say, oh, well, no, I have a point of view.
Called it leading question to get to a specific point because he's got a retort. So if you're faced with this question, don't answer it the way Greg expects.
All right. I mean, if they're genuinely atheist, they're going to say, so you don't campaign for the idea that there is no God.
Huh?
And maybe if you're campaigning, here's another question, if they are campaigning, which they are, if you're campaigning for the idea that there is no God, I presume you believe there is no God. Okay?
Or just ask, why do you believe there is no God?
Which is the case. Well, the definition of an atheist is someone who believes there is no God.
Sure. So ask them why. What is it that causes them to hold that belief? It's really not that difficult.
So why wouldn't that make you an atheist?
Remember the question at the top. What questions would you ask of an agnostic atheist? They have already said they're atheist. They're agnostic atheist. They wear both labels like I do.
Notice that's a question. I mean, I'm putting a little information in place, and then I ask a question. And see what they say.
Well, I say, I'm atheist. What's the problem?
But here is the deal, and I'll give you the categories, and I got this from Doug Geivett, philosopher at Talbot.
Link 4 shows Doug Geivett is a philosopher at Biola University.
And it's excellent. And this relates to the broader issue of people who say an atheist is someone who lacks a belief in God. I don't have a belief in God. Right. Well, you don't have a belief in God, but that's not what an atheist is. An atheist is someone who has a belief about God, and the belief they have about God is that God does not exist.
Link 5, Cambridge Dictionary, atheist. Someone who does not believe in any god or gods, or who believes that no god or gods exist.
So the ones, they're not exclusive categories. A person who has no belief in God, in all of these cases, is someone who has no belief in God because they believe God does not exist. So they do have a belief about God. And that belief about God that they have qualifies them for the definition of atheist.
Sure. But what do you achieve by telling someone what definition of atheist they're allowed to use? The answer is, of course, not very much. Don't be that jerk. All you'll do is propagate the impression that most Christians are arrogant know-it-alls and are not worth spending time with. Instead, be modest and let them give you their definition and how they use it to apply to themselves. And then you can ask follow-ups. You'll have a much more productive conversation, and you might even make a friend.
And there's nothing tricky about that at all.
It's never tricky fucking people off. Is it, Greg?
Okay, back to Doug Geivett. Doug Geivett says, give one statement. He says,
How's that thinking on your feet going, hey, Greg?
And I'm going to role play this now for you, how I would do the question in the tactical form.
Uh-oh, this is going to be embarrassing, isn't it?
So let me ask you a question of the atheist. Let me ask you a question, okay? I'm going to make a statement, and I want you to weigh in.
Are you asking a question or making a statement? Huh?
With your view. And I just want to make the observation that you have only three logical possibilities. Okay, you could either affirm it, you could deny it, or you could withhold. In other words, you are not in a position to affirm or deny, therefore you withhold. It's the only options. Yes, no, don't know.
So it's not going to be an open question. He is leading to a predetermined position that he's prepared for.
Yes, no, don't know. That's the only options logically, okay? This, as Daniel Dennett says, the atheists are the brights. They're the logical ones. All right, let's we'll talk about these logical categories. Now the foundation is set. Here's the question, or here's the statement.
So he's not asking a question, he's making a specific statement, wanting feedback. Is this honest interlocution? Is this somebody who really wants to know what you think, or is this someone who is trying to propel a label onto you?
To which you want them to respond. God exists.
I don't know.
Or there is a God, something to that effect.
I still don't know, though I suspect not and consider it highly unlikely.
So what say you? Regarding the statement, there is a God, do you affirm that first?
No.
No, I don't affirm it. Okay. Do you withhold any opinion of any sort about it?
No, I consider it unlikely, like I said.
No, obviously. This is where they might squirm a little bit. You are denying the truth of the statement, there is a God. If you deny the truth of the statement, there is a God, that means you believe there is not a God. And if you believe there is not a God, you are not an agnostic.
And this is where I would land if I had this exchange with Greg. He would then take great glee in telling me that I'm not agnostic but am atheist who believes there is no God. But what does that tell him about what I actually self-identify as, and why? It tells him nothing. This exchange does not tell him that I'm agnostic because I take the view that knowledge of God cannot be reliably gained. And as a result, I'm atheist because I cannot believe there is a God. Greg is so blinkered on the objective of defining me into believing there is no God that he has lost contact with any nuance. This from a man who's written a book called Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. Yikes.
You are an atheist.
Sure.
Now, you may not know whether your belief is true or not.
And nor do you.
That's not relevant to the question of what category you fall into, because the category regarding these things is determined by what you believe, not by what you know.
What if I believe it's not possible to know God?
And so this move that many are making, saying, well, I'm an agnostic because I don't know for sure there is no God, that's a manipulation of language.
It fits the definition, bozo.
That is not consistent with what the terms mean.
Only if you stick to very narrow definitions. There are nuances in other dictionaries and there are nuances in the way language is used.
Agnosos, agnostic, not knowing.
Or the belief that it's not possible to know.
But whether one is a theist or an atheist is not based on knowledge, it's based on conviction or belief.
Sure, so talk to us about that. Ask us why.
So, Greg, that post that you wrote is called Do Atheists Lack Belief in God? So they can find that on the website.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you for noting that.
Link 6 if you can be bothered. It's not very long and I don't recommend it.
You'll definitely help them to clarify where they're coming from with those questions.
No, you won't. All you've done is box them into a corner. Take the open question route that I have already previously suggested.
Another thing that might be helpful here is if you first start with just the basic Columbo question. What do you mean by that? Get them to describe what they mean by agnostic.
Yes, this. Create a dialogue.
Wait, Amy, you're doing Columbo better than me right now.
Well, if the shoe fits.
Turnabout here. No, you're right. I affirm. Good.
Well, because what they might do is if they're going to stress this idea that they don't know, you can use that to your advantage.
Advantage? Are you seeking a friendly dialogue or a battle here?
So if you can get them to commit to the idea that they're open to evidence.
Yes! I'm always open to evidence! Bring it on!
That they're open to hearing evidence, that they just have not heard any evidence, you could say, oh, great. Well, then if you're open to hearing what I have to say and you're just not aware of the evidence, then let's have a conversation about this since you're open to that, since you're not settled on a view.
Then for God's sake, start there. Just skip all this fucking nonsense about defining people and what they believe and what labels apply to them. Just fuck all of that lot. Get to the evidence, get to the dialogue, get to the helpful, useful conversation. Fuck it.
And so you can possibly use their own label as a way to open up a conversation.
Just skip all that and just ask a straightforward, open question, please.
Right, that's a good observation. And by the way, there are agnostics. There are people who just don't know, and because they don't know, they have not adopted any belief.
Hang on a minute. I thought that belief was what gave you the label, not knowledge. Hasn't he just contradicted what he said 10 minutes ago?
Okay, but there are a lot of people who don't know, but they strongly believe this is the case, and it's their belief that qualifies them for either theist or atheist, not their knowledge.
Few sounds of someone enthusiastically backpedaling.
If a person is genuinely agnostic, they are not weighing in on either side. They are neutral regarding this. They have no belief or view. And these also are perfectly open, presumably, to the evidence that Amy was just describing here. But if a person is really an atheist and they say they're agnostic, then I think Amy's point is even better to try to flush out the dishonest use of language.
Pot! Meet Mr. Kettle.
And that's really what it is.
If you can get past the use of labels.
Yes, just get past the labels. Don't use it. Don't even start there. Just skip it. Just bin it. Amy, bin Greg. He's not worth your time.
And have them explain what they believe in other terms. That might be a way to get around it.
Yes, that way. Have a two-way dialogue. And also, you explain your position too.
Yeah.
But yeah, Greg, there are agnostics, of course. But as soon as you're saying, I'm an agnostic atheist, now you're using contradicting terms in the same label.
No, I don't know, therefore I can't believe. Simple.
Yes, the way that the language is used. All they mean is, I believe there is no God, but I don't know there is no God.
No, I don't know, therefore I can't believe. Don't flip it round.
I mean, that may be all they're saying. Well, that's okay. Well, then they're an atheist.
You just agreed with Amy's approach. Don't ruin it, Greg.
I mean, they're not an agnostic with regards to the question of belief. And that's why it's a misuse of words, as you pointed out, Amy.
So that's great, Greg. Help them to make a distinction between belief and knowledge and then go from there.
Oh, Amy, you gave in to the patriarchy. You were on such a good road then.
Right.
Wherever they describe themselves.
Yeah, and those questions will help. And Robert, thank you for the question. These ideas will show up in print by the end of the year, God willing.
Hooray! Yippee! Can't wait. Well, this was hard to listen to. But it does peel back the covers on how many Christians view those of us who are atheists. They don't trust us, and they're not prepared to dialogue with integrity. Their MO is to view engagement as a battle of wits. This is why I do this podcast, to expose that rottenness. Yes, it is possible to have good quality conversations with Christians. We've done it here on Still Unbelievable. But it genuinely feels like those Christians are in the minority. Christian podcasts, like Stand to Reason, exist to teach Christians to dialogue with the likes of me. The Christians they reach do not listen to podcasts like Still Unbelievable, which means those Christians are not learning about atheists from atheists. They are learning about atheists from people like Greg Koukl, who, as you have heard, do not view us as being honest. If you're a Christian listening to this, please do not follow Greg's advice. Lead with the question, what is my view on God and why do I hold it? Skip the bullshit about labels. Seriously, don't even bother. If you're Greg Koukl listening to this, I'm not sure I want a conversation with you because I don't trust you to represent me honestly. I genuinely think you would come to the conversation with a predetermined opinion and that nothing I would say would change your mind. That's not honesty. That's not integrity. And I am not interested in talking to someone like that. If you're Amy Hall listening to this, I think we could have a fruitful conversation. Just don't do it Greg's way.